Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, well, you guys sent in a ton of articles about this, so we're going to tackle this whole thing with alternative weight loss drugs. Like alternatives to Ozempic and Wegovy.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, let's break it down. Like, why are people turning to these alternatives, and what are the risks, the benefits, and why is Big Pharma not so happy about it?
Right. Well, GLP-1 medications, they're definitely a hot topic, and for good reason. I mean, they really work. They're helping people lose weight,
Yeah.
but they are expensive and hard to get. So, I mean, that's where these alternatives come in, right?
Okay, so for anyone out there who might not be familiar with them, like, what are GLP-1 medications, and how come they work so well?
So GLP-1 drugs, what they do is they kind of mimic a hormone that you find naturally in your gut.
Oh, okay.
It's called glucagon-like peptide 1. Yeah,
Huh.
GLP-1 exactly. And so it slows down digestion and makes you feel fuller longer, so you just naturally eat less, and then you lose weight. It's really different from how like the older weight loss drugs work.
Yeah, yeah.
Totally different approach.
That makes sense. But like you said, they're not cheap, right?
Not at all. No. We're talking like you could pay over $1,000 a month easy for the brand name medications.
Yeah.
And then with everyone wanting them, all of a sudden there are shortages.
Right.
So even harder to get. And that's when these compounding pharmacies are coming in.
Okay, yeah, I've heard about compounding pharmacies, but I don't really get how they like fit into all of this.
Okay.
So can you maybe explain it for me and for our listener, of course?
Yeah. So compounding pharmacies, they're basically like custom medication makers. You know what I mean?
Mm.
They can like create specific doses, different formulations of these medications,
Mm-hmm.
and it often ends up being cheaper than what you'd pay for like the big brand names. So in this case, they're stepping in to produce cheaper versions of these ingredients in Wegovy and Ozempic.
Okay.
So semaglutide and tirzepatide.
So basically, instead of going through the like normal channels and paying, a ton of money for those big names, people are going to these compounding pharmacies for a cheaper option.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, one of the articles you sent even had this pharmacist in it, Michael, and he was using compounded semaglutide to manage his weight and his diabetes.
Oh, wow.
And it really worked for him. So, I, I mean, I think his story kind of shows how appealing this is. So especially for people who can't afford like the name brand prices.
Yeah. Okay, so speaking of prices, like how much cheaper are we talking? Is it a big difference?
Oh, yeah, for sure. It can be a huge difference. I mean, compounded versions of semaglutide and tirzepatide are usually like, what, $100 to $450 a month compared to, like 1,000 to 1,400 that you might pay for the brand name drugs.
That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
I can definitely see why someone would want to go the compounding route, especially if there's, watching their budget. But isn't that kind of like a legal gray area? How are they allowed to make and sell these alternatives?
That's a good question. It basically comes down to FDA regulations
Okay.
and how they handle drug shortages.
Hmm.
So the FDA allows for compounding of medications when they're in short supply.
Okay.
It's to make sure patients can get, that they can access treatment that they need.
Okay.
So that's kind of the loophole that these compounding pharmacies are using.
So it's not like really clear cut.
Not really, no. And there's actually two different types of compounding pharmacies.
Wow. Okay.
There's 503A and 503B.
Okay.
And they're actually regulated differently by the FDA.
Okay.
So 503A, they make medications specifically for a certain patient, like if they need a specific dose or a certain formulation. But 503B pharmacies, they're more like mini drug manufacturers.
Oh, okay.
They produce bigger batches of medication, and they have to meet these much stricter quality standards, similar to, like the big commercial drug manufacturers.
Oh, okay. So some of these compounding pharmacies are operating with like less oversight than others.
Yeah, pretty much.
That kind of worries me a bit about safety and quality,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's definitely something we need to look at because, compounding, it does offer a cheaper and a more like available option.
Right.
But it does come with potential downsides.
Okay, so this is where it gets really interesting. But
Yeah.
but before we get to all that,
Yeah.
I want to talk about the elephant in the room. Like Big Pharma is not happy about this.
Oh, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Novo Nordisk and Eli Lilly, the companies behind Ozempic and Wegovy,
Yes.
they have been very vocal about how they feel about compounding.
Because they're losing money.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's definitely part of it, but they're also worried about potential safety concerns.
Okay.
And they're saying these compounding pharmacies aren't, going through the same like rigorous testing
Right.
and approval processes that they have for drugs that are commercially manufactured.
So they're basically saying, hey, we spent millions of dollars developing these medications, and now these other companies are profiting off of our research without having to do the same work.
Yeah. I mean, that's putting it pretty simply, but yeah, I mean, they've even like filed lawsuits
Oh, wow.
and they're issuing warnings about the potential health risks from taking the compounded versions. I mean, it's really like this David and Goliath thing happening right in front of us.
It sounds like a really tricky situation. You've got patients' needs, the whole thing with costs, companies' interests, worries about safety, and then even these legal battles.
Right.
My head's already spinning, and we're just getting started.
I know it's a lot. It's a really tangled web, but that's why we're here to try to untangle it all
Yeah.
and help you make sense of it.
Yeah, and help our listeners, of course. But before we get into all that, the safety stuff and big pharma's, reaction and all that, I want to know more about how this is affecting people in real life. You mentioned that pharmacist Mark Michael.
Right.
Are there other people who are turning to compounding?
Well, one of the articles you sent actually talks about this single mom, Tabitha Rise, and she just couldn't afford Wegovy.
Right.
But she was able to find this clinic online that offered compounded semaglutide
Okay.
at a price that she could manage.
Wow.
And she ended up losing quite a bit of weight, and she's healthier overall.
So compounding can really make a difference for people.
Oh, yeah.
But I'm guessing it's not always, smooth sailing. So let's talk about those potential downsides, specifically those safety concerns. What do people need to be aware of if they're thinking about using compounded medication?
That's really important. And that's where it gets, a bit tricky because while compounded medications can be a real lifeline for people who just can't afford the brand name prices,
Yeah.
there are some risks.
Okay.
And the biggest one is just potential for the quality to vary.
Okay.
They're not subject to the same like really strict manufacturing rules as the big drug companies.
Right.
So there's a bigger chance that something could go wrong during the process.
Right. Okay.
You see, unlike the drugs that are like commercially made that have to go through all this testing and quality control,
Yeah.
the compounded medications, they don't necessarily have the same like consistency. So that means there's a risk of getting something that's either too strong or not strong enough or even contaminated.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, it is.
Has that happened with semaglutide or tirzepatide?
Well, thankfully the FDA hasn't seen, a ton of reports about really bad side effects from compounded versions of these drugs.
Okay.
But there's always a chance, right? I mean, especially as the demand goes up and more pharmacies are getting into the market.
So you're basically taking a gamble. You're just trusting that they know what they're doing and they're taking all the right precautions.
Yeah, it's definitely a calculated risk.
Mm.
And it's important to remember that even one bad batch can have some really, really terrible consequences.
Mm.
Back in 2012, there was this compounding pharmacy.
Yeah.
They produced contaminated steroids, and it caused this huge outbreak of fungal meningitis
Oh, wow.
across the country. Lots of people died. Lots of people got sick.
That's terrifying.
Yeah.
That's a really good reminder about how dangerous this can be. And this kind of brings us back to what Big Pharma has been saying about compounding. They obviously want to make money. Yeah.
But their concerns about safety aren't totally, crazy.
You're not. And to be fair, Big Pharma, they're not just sitting around watching this happen.
Right.
Novo Nordisk, for example, they just announced that they're putting tons of money into new production lines.
Oh, okay.
And they're trying to, fix these supply problems that are causing the demand for these compounded versions in the first place.
So they're trying to like make more to keep up with how many people want it?
Yeah.
Does that mean that they're like admitting that the price and how hard it is to get has been a problem?
It's tough to say for sure, but it's definitely a good step, right?
Yeah.
I mean, if they can make more and people can get their hands on it more easily,
Yeah.
then maybe they won't need to, go to compounding.
And maybe they'll have to like lower their prices?
Maybe, yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens. But there's something else we need to think about.
Okay.
What happens when the supply isn't a problem anymore? Yeah.
And the FDA says, okay, semaglutide and tirzepatide, they're not on the shortage list anymore.
Ooh, that's a good question.
What happens to those people who are relying on those cheaper compounded versions?
Yeah. Especially if they can't afford the brand name prices, right?
Exactly. And it puts doctors in a really difficult spot, too. They've been prescribing these compounded medications
Right.
to help their patients.
Yeah.
But what are they supposed to do when that option's gone?
It's crazy how something that seems so simple, like people wanting to be able to get weight loss medication
Right.
turns into this giant mess.
It really does. It just goes to show you how complicated everything is, especially in healthcare.
Well, we have talked about a lot in this first part of our deep dive, but I have a feeling that we're just getting started. I mean, we still need to talk about, is it even okay to go against these patents?
Yeah.
And is compounding okay even if it means going against like intellectual property rights?
Yeah. And then there's, the bigger question of how this is all going to change how we think about obesity and using medication to manage weight, like as a whole society.
Yeah, so much to talk about. But for now, I think we need to just take a breath and let all this sink in. We'll be back soon to keep going on this deep dive into the world of compounded weight loss drugs.
So, before the break, we were talking about those FDA shortages, like they might ease up.
Right, right.
And that brings up some really interesting questions about ethics.
Yeah, it does. It does. So what happens if the FDA just comes out and says, "Okay, there's no more shortage of semaglutide and tirzepatide."
Right.
What happens to the people who need those cheaper compounded versions? It's like they're kind of stuck.
Yeah. And what about the doctors?
Yeah, right.
The doctors have been prescribing the compounded medications. What happens to them? I mean, one of the articles you sent even talked about this doctor who was really worried about that, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He was worried that if the FDA took these drugs off that shortage list, that his patients would just be out of luck.
Exactly.
They wouldn't be able to afford the brand name prices and then they wouldn't be able to get a treatment that was working for them.
Right.
It's kind of a tough spot to be in. I mean, on the one hand, you've got these big companies saying, hey, we have these patents on these medications and we spent all this time and money developing them. And on the other hand, you have patients who are, they're actually benefiting from these compounded versions.
Right.
But then they might not be able to get them anymore if the FDA like changes its mind. What are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I think it comes down to access. Like being able to get the medication
Mm.
versus intellectual property rights. Like is it really okay to kind of to go against those patents even if you're trying to do something good? You know, if it means that people can get medication that they need and they can afford, that's a big question.
Yeah, it is, and it's not an easy one to answer. Are there any times in the past when this has come up like legally?
Yeah, there have been, some cases where governments have said, okay, we're going to override these patents on certain medications if
Okay.
there's a public health emergency.
Okay.
But this situation's a little different, right? It's not like a pandemic or some sudden outbreak.
Right. Yeah.
It's a chronic condition.
Yeah.
And the medications, while they do work, they're not necessarily life-saving the way that, like an antibiotic would be.
So that makes it even more tricky. It seems like the FDA is stuck in the middle. They're trying to keep the patients happy and the companies and deal with all these public health concerns at the same time.
Yeah, they're trying to make sure the medications are safe and that they work,
Right.
but also that people can get the treatments they need.
Yeah.
And in this case, those two things they're kind of fighting each other.
So what do you think is going to happen?
Oh, that's a tough one.
It's great.
It's really hard to say for sure,
Yeah.
but I think the FDA is going to be under more and more pressure to make a decision about compounded semaglutide and tirzepatide.
Okay.
Especially as the brand name stuff becomes easier to get. I mean, they might just decide to keep things the way they are and let compounding keep happening.
Okay.
Or they could really crack down on it, like make the rules stricter or even ban it altogether.
Wow.
Yeah, it's tough.
So there's not an easy answer, and no matter what happens, it's going to have a big impact on everyone involved.
Yeah, that's the thing about situations like this. There are always compromises, and it's really about figuring out like what are the good things that could happen and what are the bad things that could happen.
This whole deep dive's been really eye-opening, but But I have to say, it's kind of a bummer too.
Yeah.
It seems like no matter what, someone's gonna to lose out.
Yeah, I know what you mean. It can be frustrating to see these things happen, especially when it's about people's health.
Right.
But I think it's good that we're talking about it.
Hmm.
If we bring these issues out in the open, then maybe we can start to make healthcare better, more fair, and easier for everyone to get.
You're right. It's easy to focus on the negative, but we should be looking for solutions, right?
Exactly. And remember, this is bigger than just weight loss drugs.
Right.
It's about the whole pharmaceutical industry, how they work, how they're regulated, and and how we make sure that everyone can get the health care they need without going broke.
And it's about, how those decisions affect people's lives.
Yeah.
We can't forget about the people who are trying to manage their weight and just be healthier, like Mark Michael, that pharmacist who got help from the compounded semaglutide.
Right. And Tabitha Rees, the single mom who's finally able to afford a treatment that actually works for her.
Yeah, their stories are a good reminder that behind all the headlines and all the arguments, there are real people who are dealing with these issues.
Absolutely. It makes you think,